All right, hey everybody. This is going to be the first podcast in the series, I hope. Basically, I'm just going to be talking about my thoughts on teaching, my experience living abroad, and of course, learning a language during that time and also before. It's going to be probably not so organized in the beginning. I have made some notes, but as the podcast, or I should say, continues or progresses, definitely it'll get better. This is the first time I've ever done this. Why am I doing this? Not exactly sure. I've always thought about doing a podcast related to teaching. Also, one related to writing fiction, but that might have to be a separate series. I don't want to mix the two up too much. Some students do listen to my recorded lectures. For those of you who don't know, my name is Chris Kowalczyk. I'm an ESL teacher. That's English as a second language. Basically, that means I teach English to immigrants here in the United States, specifically in the Southern California area, Orange County and Los Angeles County. And so, of course, a high immigrant population. And basically just teach English, and more than that though, really, because it is an immigrant population, how to navigate life in the United States, kind of more of the mainstream culture. People who didn't grow up here, they're often unfamiliar with the American school system. Just little things that Americans or people who grew up in the United States do take for granted. So anyway, I'm an ESL teacher. I only teach adults. I don't teach academic English. Well, I do in a sense, but I don't teach for credit classes at universities or colleges. I focus on non-credit. Some people call it community learning, but basically, I would say it's more practical English for people who have a variety of goals, which is always a little tricky. Trying to balance everything. Some people just want to learn, just to stay mentally active after retirement. There's the social aspect. Students get to know each other very well in a friendly way, and we have parties, and they become friends outside of class and so on. And some people really do want to move on to college, university, trade school, vocational school, or some kind of advancement at their job, or to get a better job and so on. So I've been teaching English to non-native speakers since about 2007, so that will be 17 years. It's 2024 right now. What day is today? October 19th, 2024. It's been kind of a long day for me, so my brain's a little scattered. It's in the evening. I've had a pretty long week at work, so just trying to recover this weekend. I did go out this morning, had some dim sum with a friend. A bit of a long drive. That's where I grew up, is where I went to go eat. So it was a bit of a drive for me, since I did move not too far away, but let's say about 20 miles away from my hometown. But with traffic, you know how it is in LA and Orange County, the traffic is always there for the most part. Saw some pretty good fights. I'm a huge fight fan, boxing, MMA mostly. And I had some time tonight, so I thought I'd start the podcast, the inaugural episode, the first one ever. And they say, why wait until tomorrow to do what you can start today? So here we are. So what is the purpose of this podcast? As I said before, I'd always thought about doing it. I do enjoy sharing my experiences living in Japan and studying Japanese, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. And it could be potentially good for my career as well, just having the podcast under my belt. Just one more, I guess, aspect of myself as a teacher. You don't want to just be a teacher who just uses a textbook, of course, right? You want to be, I don't know if multidimensional is the right word, but you want to have a bunch of tools in your toolbox. You want to be more than just a teacher. Maybe have a website, an online portfolio, perhaps even work on committees, developing curriculum, for example, or even just workshops, where you help other teachers. You go to conferences, things like that. So there's a variety of reasons why I wanted to do this podcast. And I think I might be getting kind of bored of just teaching as well. So just a way to kind of keep myself, I guess, interested. I do, and like I said, I do enjoy talking about my experiences in Japan and learning Japanese. So this is a way to kind of get that information out there as well. Now, this mostly targeted just for the students that I already have, but perhaps in the future I'll open it up to the general public, although I don't know how many people will be interested in this. I'm just going to be doing my thing. I'm not trying to make any money. That's not the purpose of this, for better or worse. I'm just going to be sharing my thoughts. I will not really be talking about anything too personal, such as politics, my opinion on current events, things like that. But it's also not an educational podcast. I'm not trying to teach you any grammar. I'm not trying to teach you vocabulary. However, I will be providing transcripts and notes for every episode. And I've had this idea of making a quiz as well, so that after listening, you could take a quiz just to help you focus. Maybe you might want to listen again, and it'll help you focus on certain things that are probably more important than others. So I'm already at the 6-minute mark here, and I say I'd be rambling. I probably have been rambling for about 50% of that. But hey, it's my podcast. I'll do what I want. But I do have notes. There is some organization here. So my topic for today was creating opportunities for conversation. Now, here in the Los Angeles, Orange County area, and I'm sorry, my dog looks like she's going to bark. So I'm going to try to cut out those sounds, but it's not always possible. My dog is 18 years old. She's pretty healthy, doing relatively well for 18 years old. But, she gets anxious. She's temporarily blind now as well. She has a scratched cornea, which is healing, but she also has cataracts in the other eye. So she's functionally blind, but her vision should be coming back eventually. So she's barking. It's probably anxiety or something. And actually, she lived in Japan with me. But you'll hear a lot about my pets as well. So back to the original topic, creating opportunities for conversation. So it's a big thing here in the LA and Orange County area. We have a high immigrant population, so it's good for business, right? As an ESL teacher, there are always a lot of students. However, nearly all the students have the same issue. They say that they can't speak English in their daily lives, right? So for example, if someone is I don't want to single anyone out, so let's say we have a student from Germany, okay? And the student from Germany lives with their German family. They work at a German company, and when they don't have work, they call their family in Germany, they call their friends in Germany, they watch German TV, right? You can replace German with any ethnic group or nationality. It happens all the time here, right? There's just so many immigrants here in the United States, but of course, especially in the LA and OC area, Southern California, Northern California, whatever. I hope this doesn't sound bad, but sometimes it feels like you're not living in the United States in the stereotypical sense of people speaking English and Americans who grew up here, right? And for full disclosure, I'm not sure if it matters, but although I was born and raised here in the United States, my mother is from Japan. She's lived here probably more than 50% of her life, but she is an immigrant, and I grew up with a lot of Japanese influence in the house, and I lived there by myself for about 6 years, but I also spent every summer of my childhood there. So when I say things like sometimes I don't feel like I'm living in America, I don't mean that in the sense that I don't want any immigrants here. And I was an immigrant, sort of, when I lived in Japan. I'm not going to say a full immigrant because I do have Japanese citizenship as well. But I think you understand what I'm trying to say, is that it was not my home country. But what I am saying is that when you live here in the United States in Orange County or Los Angeles County, and in your neighborhood or in your daily interactions, whether where you go to which supermarket you go to at your job, when you are mostly hearing languages that are not English, it does make you think, where am I, right? Again, I don't mean that in the sense that I want any immigrants to leave this country or that everyone must speak English. But that's just the reality of it, right? So this creates an issue for students because, and I experienced this in Japan as well, which I may talk about later. But what we have with students is, again, going back to the original point, is that students say they don't have opportunities to use English in their daily lives. Now, of course, that's subjective, right? Because we can create opportunities, which goes back to the title of this episode. So they have this kind of double-edged sword, right? Where on the one hand, they're very comfortable in the sense that they can speak their first language all day. They can go to the doctor and speak their first language. They can go to the dentist and speak their first language. At the supermarket, the staff probably speaks their first language. Their neighbors probably speak their first language, and so on, right? And then on top of that, if they want to talk to somebody from their home country, these days it costs almost nothing. You don't even need a calling card anymore. You can just do an internet call, FaceTime, Zoom, whatever, right? So they're living in the United States, which is still a majority English-speaking country, of course, right? But they feel like they have no opportunities to speak English. Again, this is a subjective situation. That is not the reality. There are opportunities to speak. So, drawing on my experience and living in Japan and just my thoughts in general, I had 3 ideas for creating opportunities for conversation. So, let me get back to my notes. It's already been 12 minutes and I haven't even started from my first point here. So one thing I recommend always is volunteer work, because class is great. I always tell students, come to class. You should come to class. Class is like a laboratory, right? Laboratory, where you can experiment with your English, and you make mistakes. That's okay. You're practicing, and you should make mistakes, right? But you make the mistakes in class with the teacher and with your classmates who are very friendly. It's like training, right? And then when you go out into the real world, then you'll be more prepared. So always come to class, right? However, we also know that classroom English is not, I would say, real English in the sense of how people usually speak or how people usually act, right? The teacher understands immigrant English or accented English better. The teacher understands that students will make grammatical errors or don't understand certain cultural things, which is a whole nother topic, right? So it's good to come to class, but I think everybody knows that it's not a replacement or a substitute for, again, what we would call real life English or real world interactions. So getting back to volunteer work. Now, why is volunteer work so great? Well, of course, volunteer work, doing that in your first language or in your home country, it's good, right? You feel good about what you do, of course. You're helping other people. You're getting to know other people, so you're meeting new people. You're networking, so there could even have work opportunities there. Meeting people who know somebody who has a job that you may be interested in. You learn about your area. You find out new things. There's just so many benefits to volunteer work, which I don't really need to get into. But when you do volunteer work in I don't want to say new country, but in the United States, if you're not from the United States, you get opportunities to speak English, right? And it's the same thing as when I was did volunteer work when I lived in Japan, is you're speaking that language, right? The majority language. So there's just so many benefits, right? And some students will say, well, I don't have time for that. And I say, you make time for the things that you prioritize or that are important, right? The beauty of volunteer work is that you don't need to commit as you would to a job, right? Yes, you have a schedule, but it doesn't mean you have to keep that schedule, every day, every week, right? So, for example, I used to volunteer at the I volunteered at two animal shelters. I'm going to be talking about animals a lot because I do have pets. Right now, I just have two cats and one dog. One time, I had five cats, and of course, my dog, who is still here. My dog has been with me since 2009, so that's about 15 years. But although she's about 18 years total in age, so especially I love cats. All my students know that I love cats. I love dogs, but I really love cats. So I volunteered at a couple animal shelters here in the LA area, and also one in Japan. So at both of the one animal shelter in San Gabriel, which most people probably don't know, but you could basically just drop in anytime you wanted to. You didn't need to have a set schedule. So if you were busy, you didn't have to go. If you had time that weekend, you can go. The other animal hospital or animal shelter I volunteered at was much more structured. It was a lot bigger as well. So there was actually an online portal where you can click to volunteer, to set your hours. And you would have to do that ahead of time. But it's not like you need to come in, 3 days a week, every week, right? So you can choose maybe a 2-hour block once a month, right? Now, if you don't have time for that, I don't know what to say. Again, we make time for the things that are important and that we prioritize. And that's going to be a consistent theme with my, I guess, podcasts or my episodes, my talks, is that I believe that there are no excuses for the things that are important to us anyway. I'm not saying that I'm perfect. I make a lot of excuses. I'll be honest, I make a lot of excuses in my life. I don't want to say a lot, but I do make excuses for things that I kind of don't want to do, but I say maybe I want to do it. But I feel that in your heart of hearts, if you truly believe that something is important and that you prioritize it, I truly believe that you will not make excuses, or that you should not. That you should not lie to yourself and say, I don't have time for this. And I wrote my notes here for the end, but I'll say it right now. 5 minutes a day of whatever practice is better than 0 minutes per day. A few words of English spoken is better than no words of English spoken. And that's kind of the philosophy I keep, that I don't want to say guides me, but it informs my teaching as well. Now, I know that sounds very strict or very harsh, but I truly believe that if students want to create opportunities for speaking English, that they can do it. And there are students who actually don't have that priority, and that's okay too. As I mentioned earlier, there are many students who are learning English for other reasons and not just so that they can use it in their everyday lives. And there are other benefits to learning a language, as I mentioned. But I think for those students who truly do want to improve their speaking skills and their comfort levels and so on, they cannot make excuses. Because we know when we're making excuses. As adults, we know. I think we should know, right? In our heart of hearts. So let's get back to volunteer work. I did volunteer at a couple animal shelters. I also volunteered at a homeless shelter, which was great. And again, you just set your schedule ahead of time. You can do 2 hours a month if you want to. There's no real obligation. I also did volunteer work for a homeless children tutoring service, and ironically I did it in math, which I'm not very good at, but it was 7th grade math, so I was able to handle it, although I still didn't do a great job. I think a lot of tutoring is just also having somebody sit with you, sit with the student and just kind of be with them to help them focus. So it was great, and I think I also did volunteer teaching for ESL students at a public library. That was a little different. I had a set schedule for that because I was the teacher. So that was, 2 days, 2 hours each day per week. But that's a little bit different. I don't think anyone here is going to be teaching a class. So, again, lots of benefits to that. One of my girlfriends or ex-girlfriends, I met her at the animal shelter, which was great. But I met a lot of people. That wasn't the purpose. That wasn't my intention to get a girlfriend through volunteer work, but I met so many people through volunteering at these different places that, naturally you're going to meet people who may become your friends outside of that organization. I don't maybe like a real friend, if that makes sense, or a romantic partner. And so yeah, I met somebody who eventually became my girlfriend, and of course we had the common interest. We both loved animals, which is important because my animals sleep with me. There's hair everywhere, even though I clean up. So it's very important for me to be with someone who is okay with animals, and hopefully loves them, but at least tolerates them and is okay with them. But that's kind of a bit of a side topic. So, what did I do in Japan for volunteer work? I did a few things. A few things here and there. I did some food bank organization stuff. That was kind of boring, to be honest. And not much opportunities for conversation there, to be honest. I did an animal shelter group for a little bit, and that was great because nobody spoke English. So I had to speak Japanese. It didn't work out just because of my schedule, but still, it was a great opportunity. I did what I did more of in Japan was, instead of volunteer work, I actually did group activities, which is my next topic, or the next suggestion. So when you're doing volunteer work, and again, another advantage of doing volunteer work is, a lot of students, they think of speaking as practice, right? I'm going to practice with somebody. I'm going to sit down and practice my English. But communication is not about practice, right? It's about exchanging ideas, getting to know somebody, and so on. And that's really hard to do. When you sit down face to face with someone and try to have a conversation, it's often not natural, right? Especially if it's your second language. So again, one of the beauties of volunteer work or any kind of shared activity is that you are doing something and speaking while you're doing it. So if you've ever, when you cook, let's say you cook dinner with your family, right? And everybody's doing this and that and chopping the vegetables and boiling the water and, peeling the potatoes and setting the table, da 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 da. But you're having a conversation during that whole time, right? But you're not sitting down face to face with somebody, which again can be difficult, especially if it's your second language. And some people, even if it's their first language, maybe they just don't feel comfortable sitting down with a stranger and talking to them face to face, right? What do I talk about? What should I talk about next? How do I keep the conversation going? Again, you're talking while doing volunteer work. The focus is not conversation. The focus is the activity, but you're still talking. You don't even need to talk the entire time, right? You can sometimes you don't talk for a few minutes, because you're focusing, or you're in a different area, and then you come back and you work together and you talk again. Then you have to go do something else, so you're not talking. If you have 5 or 10 people working together, you don't need to say anything. You can just listen, right? So again, it's not a conversation practice. It's an opportunity to have conversations. I hope that distinction makes sense. Okay, there is a really great website that I used here in the United States to find all of the volunteer organizations that I mentioned, which was the 2 animal shelters, and then the homeless services shelter, the public library teaching, and the homeless children tutoring service. All of those organizations, I found them through a website called Volunteer Match. I'll put a link to that that website in the notes or description. Now, the only thing to keep in mind with a service like Volunteer Match is that you will not get exactly what you want the first time you search for something. So you have to kind of look around a lot, and you have to decide which one that you like and if this is a good organization. So that's the only thing I don't want to call it a warning, but I just want you to be careful. For example, I found really, really great organizations through Volunteer Match. They're perfectly normal places, nothing suspicious, everything was fine. However, even though I did my keyword search, I typed in animal shelter, I got so many results that I still had to look at each organization individually. And so you basically get a big list of organizations from your results, and then you just have to kind of look at each one and decide which one is good and which one doesn't look so good. But volunteer match is the place where you can start. Okay, so that's volunteer work. Now, group activities is a little bit different because it's not necessarily that you're helping anybody. It just means you're doing an activity as a group. So, for example, it could be something like a group exercise class, right? One of the things I always mention to students who I know are exercise or try to stay fit, they go to the gym, is have you ever considered doing that as a group? Gyms typically offer classes, right? If you feel nervous or anxious about going by yourself, you take your friend or family member, whatever. When I was in Japan, one thing I did was I became interested in kickboxing, so I actually joined the kickboxing gym. Nobody spoke English. Now, here's one of the things about living in Japan. Now, I lived in Japan quite a while ago. I first moved to Japan in 2004, and there were no smartphones back then, and there were not as many immigrants living in Japan at that time. There were a lot, but not as I'm sure there's a lot more now. So the one thing to keep in mind when I'm talking about my life in Japan is that I was living there at a time when smartphones were not. First, there were no smartphones, and then by the time I left Japan, most people had a smartphone, but I was kind of there during that process. So it was very hard to translate things using your phone, if you know what I mean. We didn't have like AI or Google Translate or anything like that at the time. So there was more, I guess, not pressure, but I had to speak Japanese, and people could not use English with me, if that makes sense, if they didn't speak it. So anyway, kind of again getting off on a tangent there, but I joined a kickboxing gym, and I'm not saying that I made friends with everybody. I didn't make any lifelong friends, but I was going to exercise anyway. I wanted to learn kickboxing anyway. I had to go work out anyway. So why not do it at a gym where I can learn and talk to people? And I don't have to have a conversation. I can just talk a little bit here, talk a little bit there. Listening, which I'm going to talk about later as well. But even if I'm not talking, I'm still listening and hearing people speak Japanese. Whatever you want to do, you can find a way to do it as a group. Again, it's not easy. It's not comfortable maybe for many people. You take a friend. You take a family member. I don't know how great this website is now, but for example, there's websites like meetup.com where you can join group activities. I'm not going to go too much into detail with that now because I really don't use that website anymore. But again, you can find these things. If you go to the gym, take a look at the classes. If you enjoy art, maybe you can join a group tour of a museum. Again, take a friend or family member if you're uncomfortable going by yourself, right? Cooking classes. Sometimes they're free, maybe you have to pay. If you want to learn how to cook, why not do it as a group, right? I know we like to do a lot of things by ourselves now. I like to do that too. I use YouTube to learn things. So I think, hey, I don't have to take a class. I can use YouTube and just learn something. But hey, I'm here in the United States, and my English is basically perfect, right? So I'm not the one who needs to improve my English speaking skills. I didn't take cooking classes in Japan, but I think and some of my coworkers at the university, I worked at a university there for about 5 years, and some other small schools. Again, I lived there about 6 years total by myself. And some of my coworkers, they took cooking classes in Japanese because they enjoyed cooking or baking. But the side benefit is they're improving their Japanese conversation ability. They're meeting new people, making friends, and so on, right? Painting classes, wine tasting classes. I actually attended one in Japan. It was like a wine tasting event. where somebody explained everything to us, which was great. I did a first aid course in Japan, all in Japanese. It was through the Japanese Red Cross. Nobody spoke English, so I had no choice. I had to use Japanese. But it was very interesting, especially because, if I'm trying to help someone in Japan with first aid, but they don't speak English, I think I better know Japanese. So, again, group activities, learning something in a group setting or exercising in a group setting. They have beach workouts, park yoga. You can find so many things on the internet. Sometimes you got to pay, sometimes it can be organized through your local community center. Um, you got to do the research, but I'm telling you, this is going to help you. So let's get to the third suggestion, which is public spaces in general. So what do I mean by a public space? Well, public space is anywhere, I would say, outside of your house, maybe outside of a school. Um, I wrote down bars, restaurants, cafes. You could be waiting in line at the supermarket. I don't know if that's a public space in the legal sense, but public in the sense that it's outside your house. Let's put it that way. You go to Disneyland, right? You've got thousands of people around you. Now, if you go to Disneyland, I'm sure not everyone's speaking English, but that's a whole different story, right? But most people are. So, as I tell my students, the whole world is your classroom, right? The problem is we're on our phones. We have things inside of our ears or over our ears, earbuds and headphones. We're listening to music. We're talking on the phone, probably not in English, right? You're just looking at your phone and you're not paying attention to what's around you. The world is your classroom, right? So again, when I was living in Japan, I actually didn't have an iPod when I first lived in Japan, so I had a CD player. But it only has one CD, not a lot of music on there. So most of the time, I actually didn't listen to anything. I didn't have a smartphone. This is 2004. The flip phones, they had text and you can go online, but it was really basic. Often I would just be listening to people. Not that I'm trying to eavesdrop on anyone like a spy but if I was taking the train, sometimes I would just be hearing people talk. When I was standing in line at the supermarket, walking around the aisles, hearing families talk amongst each other, amongst themselves. Now, I know, again, living in the LA or OC area, Orange County areas, that sometimes people aren't speaking English. Maybe you want to try a different supermarket. Again, I like going to H Mart, which is I don't want to say local chain, but there's a lot of these Korean supermarkets called H Mart, and it's great. I love it. I go there mostly for Japanese things, but they have all kinds of great Asian foods. But again, also my English is just fine. I don't need to improve my English. So if everyone's speaking Korean around me, I don't care, you know. But if you're a Korean person and you're going to H Mart all the time, and you're going to the Korean speaking doctor, and you're going to the Korean church, right? Not to focus just on Koreans, but there's a huge Korean community around my area. So I'm using that example. You can say Hispanic, you can say Chinese, whatever, right? You can say German. I don't care. The point is, you might want to try different places, right? Try a different supermarket that is not, I don't want, how should I say it, ethnically focused, right? Just a kind of a generic supermarket. Your Ralph's, your Trader Joe's, your Sprouts, whatever. So again, those are some considerations. Now, here's one thing that I suggested to one of my students, and he was very receptive to it. Now, I had this student, unfortunately, he's not at the school anymore. I hope he has moved on to something better. But he was a business owner, and so he had English-speaking clients, but his concern was always that he felt his conversational English was not very natural. Now, his vocabulary and grammar were excellent. He grew up in a country where people didn't speak English as their first language, but because it was a former British colony, English was spoken in business and at the government level and even in daily life, because many people did not speak the same first language. So they often use English as a way to communicate between the different ethnic groups. So what I'm trying to say is English was very, very good. The problem was he didn't have the natural, I guess, rhythms of conversation or the idioms and so on. So what I recommended him to do was go to a bar and just sit down at the bar, enjoy your beer. He liked beer, so I recommended some craft brewer bars that had a lot of craft beers. So kind of the not the normal like Coors Light or Miller Lite or Budweiser. Blech, no, thank you, right? But kind of these more unique beers that are much more delicious. And he went there. He said he tasted all kinds of beers. It's called a flight, where you can sample different kinds of beers. He wasn't drinking like 5 or 6 beers, but he was taste testing 5 or 6 beers. And yeah, he said he just sat there. He listened to people around him talking. He observed some people. Now, he wasn't trying to focus on them too much, but you're going to look around the bar or restaurant or a cafe, right? When you're at the supermarket in line, you are looking around. It's just normal, so you're going to be observing people. Not only did he listen to people, but he kind of observed their gestures, their body language, their facial expressions. And that could be another episode as well, but all these things tie into speaking, right? You can talk to the bartenders, right? Even in Japan, a country where people, at least in Tokyo where I lived, people usually don't talk to strangers. It's very rare. But even in Tokyo, you can talk to the bartender. That's what bartenders do typically. You talk to them, or they talk to you. Sometimes they don't want to talk to you, but you're the customer, and you hear customers talking about their life problems, right? You can talk to the bartenders. You can talk to the restaurant, the servers. You can talk to staff, as long as you're not bothering them, right? So I didn't get too much information from him. I'm not sure if he talked to the bartender a lot, but I know he did talk to the bartender at least a little bit. You don't have to talk to anybody. You can just listen at the very least, right? And everybody needs to eat, right? Everybody has coffee or tea sometimes. People like to drink a wine, a beer. Why not go and just listen and maybe chat a little bit too? The first time you go, you can just sit there and, you can bring something. I would say don't bring your phone maybe, because you may get lost in that and start looking at shopping and, online shopping and stuff. Maybe bring a book. Maybe bring your laptop and work on something. I don't know. You can take breaks and just listen to people. That's going to be something that you have to decide what to do. But the point is, go. And I think once you go that first time, you don't have to stay for 30 minutes. You don't have to stay for an hour. You can stay for 10 minutes. But you gotta go. You gotta get that momentum going. You need the inertia. You gotta get that ball rolling. Just go. I did that a lot in Japan. Not necessarily because I was trying to, but it was pretty common in Japan, because most of the cities in Japan are very walkable, and most people don't have cars, at least in the city. So it's pretty typical to eat by yourself. You see it happening a lot in the major cities, and I was in Tokyo. So on the way to work or on the way home from work, you just stop by at a restaurant, eat for about 20 or 30 minutes, and then you go to your apartment or home or whatever. So that was kind of a little bit more organic. That was more of the situation requiring that. Whereas here in the United States, people usually drive, and then they usually don't eat at a restaurant by themselves. They usually do a pickup if they're going to be alone, and then they just eat at home. But there's nothing wrong with eating alone in a restaurant. I still do it now sometimes. For example, if I'm working from home for the whole day, which happens often during the summer because my schedule changes. So about a month in the summer, I don't work in person. It's only online. And on those days, I'll often go have lunch outside by myself. I'll bring a book, or my Kindle to be precise. And even though I don't need to practice my English, I might speak with the servers or the staff a little bit. Sometimes I talk with another customer. Again, you have to read the room. You have to check their expressions to see if they are willing to talk. But here in the United States, at least in my experience, people will talk to you. Not everyone will talk to you, but if you if you get a good feeling, you know, you can't talk to everybody, but you can, with practice, you can pick up on whether somebody is willing to chat with you, and that happens plenty of times when I eat by myself here. And honestly, sometimes even if I work in person, sometimes just to get away from my dog, um, or just to try something new, right? Just to get out of the house for a couple hours. Um, I'll just go to a restaurant by myself and yeah, just kind of enjoy it. So I'm getting sidetracked again. Now, talking to staff, right? Talking to the servers, talking to other customers, perhaps. You can just start with a hello. How's your day? You can even make a joke like my ESL. I'm learning English. I'm studying English. I'm an ESL student, whatever. And my teacher, my teacher's homework is to talk to somebody, right? And you're gonna find if somebody looks like a friendly person, I think they'll enjoy the conversation, even if it's just a 1 or 2 minute conversation. Um, you know, like I said, you know, having lived in Japan, one of the things I did not like about living in Japan, even though I could speak the language just fine, is that it's hard to talk to random people in Japan. Now, the countryside's a little bit different, perhaps, but definitely in Tokyo, in the big city, most people did not want to have a conversation with a stranger, which is perfectly fine. Cultural differences, and you know, some people are very weird. You know, do you really want to talk to a stranger? They could be very weird. They could harass you. They might want something from you. So I totally understand that. But it was one of the things I did not like about living in Japan, or at least in the big city in Japan. Whereas here in the United States, in LA, Orange County, if you have the right attitude, or if you have a friendly attitude and you're not afraid to make mistakes, and you're not worried about somebody judging you and so on, which often happens to the students, is that their ability is much higher than their confidence level, unfortunately. And then we have the reverse situation, where some students' confidence level is much higher than their actual ability. But often that confidence can lead to more opportunities to speak English, right? So, getting back to the original point, which I kind of forgot actually. We're talking about confidence. Right, so if you have the right attitude and you're friendly enough, and you can even tell the other person that this is part of your homework as an ESL student, is making conversation with people, I think many people would have conversations with you. I was a server at a restaurant for a couple years, and you know, I worked many types of jobs: supermarket, restaurants. I'm trying to think of any other jobs I had. And I think that was about it. Yeah. Oh, and I worked at a gym as well. So, you know, before I started teaching English in 2007, but I started working in probably like 1994. No, 1990. 2000. I'm sorry. 2000 is when I started working. So I was I was in 11th grade. Officially, my first real job was in the 11th grade in 2000. And I was working at a little shop. They were selling Japanese, like, plates and teapots and kind of more expensive stuff like that. But I was talking to customers all the time. You know, they would talk to me, I would talk to them. Sometimes the conversation's only 10 seconds. Sometimes the conversation's 5 minutes, you know? Again, I think that's one of the great things about American culture, at least, again, here in Los Angeles and Orange County, is that depending on the other person, you can have a conversation with a stranger or a staff member, and yeah, you don't know where it can go. It can go for a few minutes, you know. Anyway, so it's okay to talk to staff. It's okay to talk to other customers. Again, you just have to. It's a skill you have to learn as well. Again, if you want to create these opportunities. So let me get back to my notes here. And I almost forgot to mention, so if you do go to a restaurant or a bar or a cafe by yourself and you just sit there, what is something that you can do while you're listening to people? If you don't, because you're not going to have an hour-long conversation with the bartender. Please don't do that. That's, they'll probably stop anyway. But you can bring homework. You can bring your English materials, right? You can bring your textbook. You can bring your notes from class, right? Whatever English learning materials you have. That is also a good conversation starter, right? Let me just give you a quick example before I kind of want to wrap up here, but let me give you a quick example. So you talk to somebody and you say, oh, hi, how are you? Or they say, how are you today? And you say, oh, I'm fine, thank you. What would you like to order? And you say, well, I'll try, what beer do you recommend, right? Which beer or which wine do you recommend? Well, I recommend this wine, and da-da-da. You start talking about the wine, and then you say, okay. And then maybe you don't know what to say. Maybe you get confused, right? And you say, sorry, my English is not so good. I'm actually an ESL student. I'm learning English. And actually, my teacher told me to come here by myself and just to practice making small talk and to listen to people speaking English. And you have your ESL textbook or your other learning materials, in front of you, right? Great conversation starter. If the other person is friendly, they may ask you some questions. They may tell you that their parents took ESL classes. That's happened to me before when I tell people I'm a teacher. A lot of people say, my parents took ESL classes. That's a great job. Thank you for doing that. And so, again, it's about creating opportunities and not limiting yourself. So I think I'm going to stop there with those 3 main suggestions. And again, friendliness does go a long way. I'm going to tell you one more thing about that. So here at my apartment complex, as is typical in Southern California, is that the majority of the maintenance workers and the landscapers and, people doing those types of jobs, that manual work, obviously the majority of them are Spanish-speaking immigrants, right? I don't think there's anything wrong in saying that. It's just this area, right? So many of them, their English is not very high level. I would say the most of them have high beginning or low intermediate English proficiency. I would say mostly high beginning high, which is about level 200 out of a total of with 500 being the highest. But you know what? They're so friendly and they try to have conversations. I try to speak with them. I try not to speak too quickly with them, but I don't speak slowly either. And we still have a lot of things to talk about. But they're friendly. They have that energy. They have that confidence, even though their ability is not that high. And so, just think about yourself. If you're understanding what I'm saying here, your English level is probably in the 300 or 400 level or 500, and maybe your confidence is not quite matching your ability. So anyway, friendliness, having that kind of energy or positivity, that can go a long way in your conversation, even if your ability is not that high. And if the other person is friendly, they will understand that you're an immigrant or that you're an English learner. They will understand if they are friendly. And you can tell from their face, hopefully. So I think I should wrap this up. I have to go get my clothes from the laundry room. I got an alert on my phone saying the dryer cycle is finished. So I got to go pick it up. They're not going to close, but yeah, I don't want to leave it in there either. It's been about 48 minutes. So I'm thinking maybe an hour max would be good for this podcast series, but we'll see how it goes. So what's my general advice for creating opportunities? Again, be present and pay attention. Get off your phone, okay? Take your earbuds out. Take your headphones off when you're outside. And now if you're going for a run, okay, that's different, right? But when you're at the supermarket, when you're at Disneyland, when you're at the restaurant, wherever you are, keep your ears open, okay? Get your eyes off your phone. Even the smallest moments can be opportunities. Hi, how's your day? How are you? Right? Now, you don't have to talk to everybody. There's a lot of people here in my apartment complex. I might say hi and they don't say anything. That's okay. That's their right. Sometimes I don't want to have a conversation. Somebody talks to me and I kind of don't want to have a conversation too. That happens sometimes, right? But you will find through trial and error, right? Some people will not say hi back to you, but you will find who is friendly enough, and you say hi to them and they may say hi to you and may start a conversation. Again, could be just a few words, but a few words is better than zero. You're building your confidence, You're building your conversation skills, your social skills in your second language, English. And it's just a muscle that you keep exercising every day, right? I'm not saying don't be scared. It's okay to be scared. That's human nature. It's not your home country, even though if you've lived here a long time, maybe you're always in that same social bubble, that same language bubble. Um, but it's just something that you have to practice little by little. And I guarantee you will be able to create opportunities, even in the smallest places. As I said before, and this is a running theme, I believe if I continue this podcast, it will be a running theme, is no excuses. In your heart of hearts, you know if you're making excuses or not making excuses. And again, you just have to be honest about your priorities. How important is it for you to speak English conversationally, right? If it's not important, that's perfectly fine. If you're learning English because you want to just kind of keep exercising your brain, because you want to make friends at the school, just because you're interested in English, maybe you don't really want to have a lot of conversations, you're just interested in the language learning aspect, that's perfectly fine. As long as you are honest with yourself about why you are learning English and whether conversational English is important to you. Just be honest with yourself, okay? 5 minutes a day is better than 0, and a few words a day is better than none. Anything else I want to say here at the end? I'm sure things will come up in future episodes. Maybe I'll close with a funny story. So, because again, I should always say, I sound kind of lecturing. I hope I don't sound like I'm just trying to lecture everyone that I know everything. I'm just speaking from my experience, again, living in Japan and as a language learner, and of course as a teacher as well. But again, I'm not focused really on the teaching English aspect in this podcast series. I'm not trying to teach you how to speak English or anything like that. These aren't English lessons, right? So it's more just from my own experience and my opinions rather than any teaching methodology, especially specific to English. But I'll tell you a funny story because I know it's difficult. I'm not saying it's easy. I did not speak a lot of Japanese as a kid, even though my mom is from Japan. We used a lot of Japanese words that, especially those that are not translatable into English. You know, every language has words that you can't really translate or expressions. So things like itadakimasu, gochisousama. These are things you say at the beginning and the end of a meal. You can't really translate those things to English, right? A lot of food vocabulary. So kyuri, which is cucumber. Miso shiru, which is miso soup. Shoyu, which is soy sauce. Tofu's tofu, right? Gohan, which is rice. So, things like that. Baka, which means stupid. Urusai, which means you're noisy, shut up. Oyasumi nasai, which means good night. So, a lot of those different things. But my point is, I wasn't really what you would say like a fluent speaker of Japanese when I was a kid. So I did have to learn, I think I started learning when I was 16. I started to really study rather than just kind of using what I knew. And I really started to study when I was 16. And then, anyway, I'll kind of probably talk about that more in the future. But my point is, it was not an easy process. As I tell my students in class, I would be sweating under my armpits and my hands would be sweaty. I would be sweating on my forehead. I would be nervous. My teeth might be chattering a little bit, or I might be shaking a little bit. I had to give speeches and presentations in Japanese sometimes. I've had a few job interviews in Japanese when I lived there. Before I became an English teacher, I had other jobs. I interviewed at a couple restaurants. I interviewed at some company. So anyway, oh my God, like I'm saying, it's so stressful. Like I think I try to share this experience to show students that I've been in their shoes. Now it's not exactly the same because Japanese culture is my culture in a way, and I did grow up speaking it a little bit, and I have that familiarity and that personal connection, right? I mean, I am Japanese, half Japanese, but I would say I feel three quarters Japanese. But that's my ethnic background and all that. That's could be a topic for another time. But my point is, it was not easy. So let me tell you the story, and then I'll close out here. So I remember, I think I was 17 years old. So I had been studying Japanese seriously for about a year, and I was trying to look for opportunities to talk. Actually, I would go to Little Tokyo. I remember at that time. I did work in Little Tokyo, actually. At that time, I was a high school junior in high school, so about 17. And then I would speak Japanese to the people in the other stores. You know, I would go buy some music, for example, and then I would talk to some of the staff, or I would get food, talk to the Japanese staff a little bit. I actually got a girlfriend from one of the restaurants, and she was from Japan. Maybe that's from another story. Um, and she was I was 17 at the time, and she was 23, and that was a little awkward, but that's a whole different story as well. But my point is, so one time I was in the elevator, and there was this Japanese guy, and I think he was a businessman because he didn't really look like he was familiar with the U.S. And I tried to start a conversation with him in Japanese, and I think it was hot, so I think I said like, "Kyo atsui desu ne," which means, "Wow, today's hot, isn't it?" You know, something stupid like that, right? Just like a weather conversation starter. Yeah, "Kyo atsui desu ne." And then he started talking, and at that time, I had no idea what he was saying. So I think because my pronunciation of Japanese is pretty natural, my brother as well, just because we were speaking it, at a very young age. Well, I mean, when we were 2 or 3 years old, right? So I think he may have thought that I was actually like from Japan or more fluent. I think that might have been confusing because he just kept speaking Japanese. I didn't say anything. I just stood there. It was an elevator. I think I mentioned that, right? So it was like, maybe like a 15-second ride in the elevator, and I was completely silent. I had no idea what to say. So I know it's hard. But I was 17 at the time. I didn't really understand what to do if I didn't know what to say. But those of you listening are probably much older than 17. You have a lot more experience. And the whole point is, you are going to make mistakes. You are going to feel uncomfortable. You are going to be anxious sometimes. But you just got to keep going. I will say one more thing. Even though I was trying to speak Japanese to that guy in the elevator, I was still in the United States. I did not need to use English, Japanese. But for you living here in the United States, or I don't know, if you're not one of my students and maybe you're living in Australia or something, the stakes are going to be much higher, right? So definitely just try, even just a little bit every day. Okay, we'll close out there. Take a look at the notes and the transcript, and there should be a quiz as well. Yeah, and if this goes well, I'll just try to keep making more episodes. All right, so this is Chris, and I hope you enjoyed listening to my ramblings about my experience learning Japanese, living in Japan, and my thoughts on how to create opportunities for conversation in English here in the United States, but perhaps you're in another English-speaking country.